morning, lovelies! It's spooky season! Legit the best time of year. And to celebrate, we are breaking down all of the horror movie subgenres that we are going to be just diving into all month long, because literally, it's one of the best parts about October is all the horror movies. Now, before I get started into the subgenres, I should probably just real quick define the actual genre of horror. So, what is the horror genre? Horror is a story genre that seeks to scare the shit out of you. It's stories that prey on the viewer's biggest fears or worst nightmares. It overlaps but is not to be confused with the thriller genre, which focuses more on suspense rather than actual fear. There are a ton of subgenres within horror, and they all overlap, and they all have little subgenres under those subgenres. So if I miss or gloss over your specific subgenre favorite, I'm sorry. Please share it in the comments. Alright, we are going to get started with Gothic Horror, a classic. This is basically Victorian horror and kind of the start of modern horror as we know it. This started with Dracula, Frankenstein, and pretty much everything written by Edgar Allan Poe. It often includes some sort of romance too, because romantic subplots will just ruin anything. More modern examples would be Interview with a Vampire, Sleepy Hollow, the Johnny Depp one, and Crimson Peak. If it takes place in a vaguely Victorian-ish time and is scary, it's Gothic horror. Up next, Slasher. A serial killer goes after a group of people, usually dumb teenagers, and murders them all one by one in increasingly bloody and creative ways. That's it. That's the genre. This can be supernatural, like Nightmare on Elm Street, or completely natural-ish, like Halloween. Next up, body horror and gore. Now, sometimes body horror and gore are divided into their two separate subgenres, but they're so similar that we're just gonna conflate them for the sake of time. These two focus on the vulnerability of the human body and any and all unnatural changes that can be made to it. Torture is disturbingly frequent. I mean, these two kind of birthed the torture porn subgenre. The Saw franchise is a classic. Anything created by David Cronenberg, The Thing, and The Exorcist are also in this area. Up next, the monster subgenre. Rather than a human serial killer, the thing murdering everyone is an unknown, terrifying monster. Werewolves and vampires are the classic pinnacle examples, of course, but it can be any physical, non-human entity that wants to kill or eat anything in its path. The monster subgenre is stupid popular for obvious reasons. I mean, we've been doing this since we could tell stories, but just looking at modern cinema, Jaws, Cujo, Godzilla, Frankenstein, Dracula, Dawn of the Dead, I mean, you could put so many more in the comments. Next up, let's talk about science fiction horror. This one merges the genres of horror as a whole with science fiction as a whole. This one hit the mainstream with Alien, although you could argue that it got started as early as Frankenstein. It often takes place in outer space and almost always involves an alien monster, conflating this with the monster subgenre. Now, this is very clever because we know how to deal with werewolves, vampires, and ghosts. I mean, silver bullets, you wait until dawn, and you hire a priest for an exorcism. But if you have first contact with an alien, and that thing's trying to kill you, there's no centuries of lore on how to deal with that. You gotta figure that out as you go along. And if you're in outer space on the space station, you're doubly fucked because you can't just leave. You'll die. You'll asphyxiate. You gotta, make your way to the escape pods if they exist. And usually the alien monster is smart enough to kind of block your exit. Up next, supernatural horror, a personal favorite of mine. This one is very similar to the monster subgenre, with one notable exception. You can't kill a ghost. I mean, with monsters, it's just a matter of finding the right type of bullet or weapon, or even just waiting until the sun comes out to get rid of them. But you can't really do that with ghosts, demons, or spirits. The best you can do is find the right type of priest or rabbi or holy person and have them stage an eviction. And even then, that really only has like a 50-50 chance of actually working. These movies would be something like Paranormal Activity, Poltergeist, The Conjuring, The Exorcist again, Possession. Anything to do with, ghosties, demons, and other incorporeal, probably possessive creatures. Up next, psychological horror. Rather than focus on physical threats like a big scary monster or zombie horde, or even really the supernatural threats like a ghost or a demon, psychological horror focuses on the state of mind. A character's mind will deteriorate either through natural or supernatural causes, and thus will decide to murder their whole family. Think Silence of the Lambs or The Shining. This one is controversial, and personally, I'm not a huge fan of it. These movies often link real mental health issues with violence and horror, which results in stigmatizing the people who actually have these issues and need to get help for them. But they don't because of stigma that is perpetuated by these movies. For the record, the vast majority of people suffering from mental health issues are not violent, and most of the time when they do turn violent, it's self-harm, not murderous rampages. Enough about that. Found footage. This is a new one. The characters themselves are the filmmakers, and the movie is a recording of whatever horror they've stumbled upon, usually before dying gruesomely, and then it's found by someone else. Essentially, this is kind of like the film version of first-person point of view, whereas other films traditionally kind of give you that buffer where you're seeing them in third-person point of view, you're observing the characters struggling with this horror. First-person point of view, found footage film literally puts you in their shoes. You are seeing and hearing only what those characters are seeing and hearing. Think The Blair Witch Project and Cloverfield. Up next, comedy horror. Horror that makes fun of itself. Scream broke modern ground on this one. Shaun of the Dead and Cabin in the Woods are personal favorites of mine. And finally, holiday horror. This is a very specific subgenre that takes place during the holidays. Christmas is usually the one here. It subverts all the fun, happy stuff about Christmas and the holidays into terrifying monsters that want to eat you. The Nightmare Before Christmas is kind of the kid-friendly version of this. For more adult audiences, we got Krampus, Black Christmas, and of course, the Star Wars Christmas special. Sometimes you don't even have to try to horrify your audience. It just happens. Those are all the major horror subgenres. Please tell me your favorite subgenres and those movies in the comments below so that I have a never-ending list of movies to watch this month. I will see you next time. Happy Halloween, lovelies!